So, folks, we're here today to talk about someone I consider one of, if not the worst historians on YouTube. And of course, I'm talking about the venerable Zoomer Historian channel. This is a channel that I stumbled across maybe like a year or so ago when I noticed it starting to pop off. And well, let's just take a quick look here. Yep, they have about 200,000 subscribers, and one of their recent videos, uploaded about 3 days ago, has around 162,000 views. And I thought, you know what? Let's go over that, shall we? Because some of you, if you're like relatively new to my channel, you might not know who I'm talking about or who Zoomer Historian is. Um, but let's just say that I did a video about him a while back, going over his video claiming that Lebensraum was a myth. And weirdly enough, all of his videos have to do with World War II Nazi history. And, well, I should add that there is a small asterisk at the end of all of his videos because, you know, he does do forays into not Nazi history in very specific circumstances. Okay? So today we're going to talk about Rhodesia. And, well, before we get too deep into that, remember to like, comment, and subscribe because it really helps out the channel when you do, and helps get us up in the algorithm. So consider doing that. Now, I saw that he did a video published 3 days ago titled "The Rhodesia Myth," and this is basically his attempt to. Let me put it this way: I haven't watched the whole video yet. Maybe I'm wrong. But generally, you don't hear about Rhodesia that much because its existence lasted approximately like 14 years or so before it became Zimbabwe. Basically, the general overview of the history of this of Rhodesia is it got founded essentially as a company territory and as part of the British Empire. Then it became Rhodesia for about 14 years. And then it became Zimbabwe. Right? And yes, only white supremacists seem to talk about Rhodesia. And that's generally speaking because Rhodesia, during the time it existed, had a white minority population that specifically wanted to embrace independence in order to maintain the power and wealth of the white minority ruling class, and they were terrified of, black people taking over. Essentially, it was incredibly racist and disgusting in a number of different ways, and we're going to be talking about it here, and figure it'll be an interesting conversation. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
All wrong. The struggle has been painted as a small group of racist white settlers who were still stuck in colonial times, refusing to let go of power. They, for no reason other than blind racism, decided to not let blacks partake in the governing of their country, and they attempted—
Wait, no. It's not for no reason. It's because, one, they were racist and had ideologies largely predicated along that racism. And I say ideologies because there were a number of different pseudosciences that were embraced by supremacist groups at that time in order to justify, the oppression of black people. And those traveled along a number of different routes. But the end result was this white supremacy. and that white supremacy was designed to protect the white ruling class's wealth. Because the ruling class was created along racial lines, and that ruling class benefited politically and economically from that white supremacist ideology. It's why they had it. It's why they propagated it. It was useful to them, right? It was useful to their power to portray black people as being incapable of ruling themselves or being only capable of violence, etc., etc., etc. It was useful to the ruling class. That's why it existed. It's not for no reason.
To defend their apartheid regime by force. The whites in this narrative, of course, horribly mistreated the blacks, almost to the point of slavery. This is all total nonsense. The Rhodesian cause was perhaps the most justified cause that has ever been fought for. History.
Oh, holy shit. The Rhodesian cause is the most justified cause in all of history. It, again, entirely predicated on perpetuating the white supremacy narrative in order to solidify and codify a whites only ethno state where like white people by virtue of their skin color ruled, and essentially black people in the country were treated as property.
Has proven this to be completely and utterly the case. European settlers had turned a barbarous land with no written language or even the wheel into a prosperous outpost of civilization in merely a few decades.
There was already, to be clear, there was already civilization here prior to, you know, the British coming through and seizing the land.
This is what they were defending. To begin with, it is worth looking at the state of Rhodesia.
This is what they were defending. Look at all of those bowler hats. You think anyone else could have bowler hats? I don't think so.
Before her independence and before the war began. After World War II, the Rhodesians, who had recently refused an offer of independence from Great Britain, were left with a choice. They could join a union with South Africa or form a federation with North Rhodesia, modern-day Zambia, and Nyasaland, modern-day Malawi. The British strongly suggested that the latter option should be taken, and the Rhodesians were nudged in that direction. The people chose the federation narrowly, but this project lasted merely 10 years. The British went back on their promises and allowed Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland to obtain their independence. The Southern Rhodesians were denied theirs. At the Dissolution Conference, the British Deputy Prime Minister, Rab Butler, told Rhodesian Prime Minister Winston Field, quote, "I am in the pleasant position to be able to tell you that Her Majesty's government has given the deepest consideration to your request. The Southern Rhodesia will get independence no later than the other two territories."
Wait, was there a dude in a powdered wig? Yeah, because it was British. The powdered wigs were part of the, you know, governmental regalia.
In view of your country's wonderful record of responsible government over the past 40 years, during which time you have conducted yourself without blemish, managed your financial affairs in an exemplary fashion, and above all, the great loyalty you have always given to Britain in time of war, not only in the 2 world wars, but subsequently in Africa and with your air force in Aden, I have been asked to convey to you our government's long-standing gratitude for your exemplary record, and to confirm that in these circumstances we are able and willing to meet your request, end quote. This promise was betrayed.
Okay, can I just like throw this out there for you guys, right? I want to know, and I want to put my cards on the table here. I want to know how this guy is going to try and excuse things like the African Labor Regulations Act. Okay? I want to know how he's going to try and spin that, because what that act did was essentially make it illegal and a crime for any black person to effectively quit their job. So, like, I want to know how he's going to try and justify shit like that. Yes, Zoomer Historian is defending Rhodesia now. Like, to kind of give you guys, like, an idea of what we're talking about here. even by the standards of the British government, Rhodesia was horrifically racist. Even by the standards of like South African apartheid, Rhodesia was horrifically racist. So it's it was bad. Like real bad. And that's just one of them. That's just one of the acts that was imposed upon black people in Rhodesia, right?
The pattern of colonization, especially British colonization. Ah, look at all that untamed wilderness with no people living here. Excuse me, we've been here the whole time. Like I said, no people.
Yep. That is essentially it. But like also understand that even in the context of like the racial the racially segregated suffering imposed during colonialism, during like the colonial era, like people who partook in that looked at Rhodesia and said, whoa, that's pretty fucked up. Like, I just want you guys to understand that that Rhodesia is uniquely bad in such a way that white supremacists today still talk about it as if it was one of the greatest achievements of mankind. You know?
Trade. But regardless, southern Rhodesia was seen as the jewel of Africa, a model colony, indeed a self-governing colony. The British had never run the place directly, a dominion in all but name. The high standards in Rhodesia did not just apply to whites, but to the blacks too, with the exception of South Africa.
To the blacks. This little fucking Nazi bitch. I hate him so much.
Rhodesia could boast, by far, the highest living standards for blacks on the continent. Indeed, around 1/3 of Rhodesian blacks were immigrants from neighbouring countries who had come due to just how good things were. Rhodesian Prime Minister.
I wonder, just again, how good things were. Another example. Remember how I talked about how the African Labor Regulations Act prevented black people from quitting their jobs? Well, there was another act called the African Lands Husbandry Act. And that basically allowed the government to come in and say, hey, you're black. You have to work for us for 3 months of the year. Every year. Essentially creating a system that turned black people in the country into slaves for 3 months out of every year. So, yeah, it's just so good there.
From 1964 to 1979, Ian Smith writes in his memoirs, The Great Betrayal, quote, British representatives on the committee had pointed out that the evidence showed very clearly how much more we had done for our black people in the fields of health, education, housing, culture, and recreation facilities than Britain had achieved in the two northern territories. There was an obvious reason. To our north, the countries were British colonies governed by British civil servants who went back home after 18 months' service, their children being educated in Britain. Here, in Rhodesia.
Oh, also, I also want to just note something here, that when we talk about Rhodesia independence, understand something really important about that, okay? When we talk about Rhodesia being like a nation, it wasn't really a nation, okay? It wasn't really a country. Because in order to be a country, you have to be recognized as a country by other countries. Okay? And Rhodesia was condemned internationally, and not a single other country recognized Rhodesia as a country. Not a single one. Not even fucking South Africa said Rhodesia is a country. Okay? Does anyone know when this Zoomer person made this documentary? It went up 3 days ago. God. Exactly, Jess. Yeah, the United Nations called it an illegal racist minority regime.
We knew that the country was ours in perpetuity, and our children and grandchildren would go on living here. Hence the need for us to work in conjunction with our indigenous people and incorporate them into our plans for the future.
Yeah, they were just helping out the indigenous people. The white minority rulers, they were just helping out the indigenous people of the Rhodesian area. They were just they had really big hearts, those white supremacist rulers of the territory. Which is why they deliberately tried to crack down on any of the independence movements or peaceful movements to try and get some kind of equitable relationship in the government between the indigenous people and the white supremacist rulers. Which, by the way, culminated in like a violent crackdown on, I believe it was called the Rhodesian African National Congress. Do you think Israel is similar to Rhodesia? I think Israel is doing violent colonialism to the Palestinian people. Yeah. In that regard, viewing it as an outcropping of colonialism, yes.
It was for this reason that it was well known that we had the best race relations and the highest standard of living for our people than any country in Africa. And
that is a fucking lie. We had the best race relations. Don't let anyone tell you differently. And if they're black, just, send them my way and we'll have some people visit them. This is insane. They were internationally condemned for like the entirety of its like illegal and illegitimate run as a country.
Quote, the British clearly felt that Southern Rhodesia was far more advanced than her almost entirely black counterpart in Northern Rhodesia, or indeed anywhere else in Africa. Northern Rhodesia was to be given independence. The former was to be betrayed. The British simply turned around and said that Southern Rhodesia must be governed by her majority population, the Africans. African-led countries in Africa were certainly nothing new. Indeed, that experiment had been underway in the decade leading up to the Federal...
What do you mean that fucking experiment? African people have ruled African countries for like almost the entirety of Africa as an existing like polity. What do you mean? There are like hundreds, thousands of African kingdoms. Shut the fuck up. God damn it. There's just like this entire way of thinking in these Zoomer historian videos where, again, it's like the reason people just believe like AI generated shit. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to believe that. I'm not going to check any of the info because AI is just confidently wrong. Fascists are the same way. It's why they love AI so much. Fascists look at AI and they go, ah, yes, finally a machine that can do all of the lying that I do in a fraction of the time. They find it a genuinely useful innovation in that way, and like, that's all this is. It's just being confidently wrong while pushing a specific political ideology. It's disgusting.
Federation's dissolution in 1963. This experiment went how every European who actually lived amongst Africans predicted. Without fail, every African nation that was given its independence duly collapsed into anarchy or dictatorship within years.
This is just like insane horse shit. You can find records of like, I don't know, like the Kingdom of Mali, for example. It became Ghana. Like, it lasted from like the 1200s into like maybe the early 1700s. Like, you can't just like sit there and just say, oh yeah, it's just an experiment that has never been tried. An African running an African nation. Like, Mansa Musa was like one of the wealthiest people to ever exist on the planet. Like I just the idea here, again, it's just Nazi horse shit, essentially.
Years, if not months. It was hard to find a democracy which had ever had more than one election in Africa. Indeed, as Elspeth Huxley once said, you cannot translate leader of the opposition into any African language. The closest result is chief enemy. Democracy was a foreign concept. The African only knew dictatorship and the brutal treatment of your political opponents. Whites, not a majority in any nation in Africa, always ended up facing disaster when the blacks took charge. The Congo.
Hey, just real quick. Hey, what mode of governance was imposed by colonial rule? Just out of curiosity, what kind of self rule was implemented during colonial rule? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Was it like representative governance? Was it democracy for the colonial territories? No, actually, people were subjugated, and in a lot of cases, were owned by private corporations for a period of like over 100 years. Again, I talk about this book all the time, and I had a chance to have the author on, and I'm going to try and reach out and make it happen, but Donald Trump's election kind of threw all this off, right? But I was going to have on the author of King Leopold's Ghost. We were going to talk about his book. And I think in order to understand colonialism in Africa, one of the most important books you can read to understand it is King Leopold's Ghost. And like the idea that like, oh, the, people in Africa just didn't want democracy, it's just horseshit. And like King Leopold's Ghost talks about how, King Leopold II bought, the Belgian Congo. And it was personally owned by the king. Like it was personally owned by him. He imposed policies that like mutilated indigenous people, chopped off their hands if they weren't getting enough rubber from the trees. But yeah, I'm sure the native people in Africa just didn't like the idea of ruling themselves. They were just so addicted to being ruled by tyrants. Insane.
Was, of course, the most famous example. From the second the Congolese were given their independence, they turned to killing each other and their white population.
Oh, interesting. Just real quick.
When the Congolese were given their independence, they turned to killing each other and their white population.
Just real quick. Hey, I didn't bring up King Leopold's Ghost in the Congo Free State, or the Belgian Congo, in response to what he was about to say, but damn, that was really apropos. Like, the Belgian Congo, like, fought for its independence. It was like a horror show. You have like concentration camps, you have mass graves, you have like massacres. Let me look up the number real quick here. Estimated death toll as a result of the colonial activities in the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908 are that around 5 to 10 million people died. So that's cool. In 1901 alone, it's estimated that around 500,000 Congolese had died from sleeping sickness. It's really, really bad. And like some of the estimates here are almost certainly underestimates. So, moving on. I wonder why that didn't lead to a period of enlightened stability for the country. Who can say?
Not just killing, either, but
Belgium's parliament took possession of the Congo Free State from Leopold II soon after the publication of the Casement Report. Even the Belgian parliament were appalled. Yeah, it was so bad that even racist Europeans were like, "Oh shit." It kind of like how with Christopher Columbus, like the Spanish court stripped him of his titles and imprisoned him after reports of what he did in the New World came to light. Similar vibes, but on an even larger scale. A what sickness? There is a sickness called sleeping sickness. It's a it's also known as African trypanosomiasis, but it's called sleep sickness. It's basically from an African parasite.
but killing in the most barbaric ways. Nuns, especially, were singled out for horrific treatment. This butchery saw an absolute flood of whites entering southern Rhodesia from the Congo, with many a horror story to tell. All of the civilization which Europe...
Also, keep in mind that a lot of the white people that were in the Congo Free State, when it, became genuinely not ruled by Belgium anymore, were people who were enforcing colonial rule prior to the freedom of the country.
Europeans had built up over decades, or even centuries, had collapsed immediately. As Stephen Mitford Goodson put it, quote, "In 1960, sub-Saharan Africa was one of the most prosperous parts of the world, a net exporter of food, with not one of its colonies burdened by international debt. This pleasant state of affairs would change dramatically over the ensuing years for the worse." End quote. To anyone with eyes, the African experiment had failed. Clearly, the Europeans had pulled out too early. To the British, however, this meant nothing. The demands for...
Oh, by the way, just real quick, I was wondering, right?
Parts of the world, quote, centuries, had collapsed immediately. As Stephen Mitford Goodson put it, quote, "In 1960,
Now, always worth noting and checking the names that get dropped in videos like this. Who's Stephen Mitford Goodson? One might ask. Is he a well-known historian? Is he a prominent, well-known, level-headed academic? No, actually. He was the director of the South African Reserve Bank and the leader of the Abolition of Income Tax and Usury Party in South Africa. And you can guess about how well they did in the elections, which were not great. And what really kind of sunk their chances in the election, they wound up in 1999 getting only 10,611 votes, by the way, about 0.07% in the national elections. But oddly enough, the other thing that tanked their political run here was that Goodson authored a book titled Bonaparte and Hitler versus the International Bankers. And I don't know, does anyone want to take a wild guess about what that book was about? Anyone want to take a wild guess about what Bonaparte and Hitler versus the International Bankers was about? If you guessed Nazi shit, yeah, exactly. He basically said that the Jewish bankers are what caused the Napoleonic Wars and World War II. And that Hitler was just a good-hearted lad fighting the international Jewish banking regime. And it turns out, Stephen Mitford Goodson is a Nazi who also doesn't believe that the Holocaust happened. And he thinks that it's, and I'm going to do a direct quote here, a huge lie. And his entire belief is that Jews made up the Holocaust in order to create a new industry of extracting money from the German people on the basis of like collectivizing guilt. So, gee whiz, I wonder why Zoomer historians bringing up non-academic, non-historian neo-Nazis as a valid source on the history of Rhodesia. That's crazy, you know? That's wild. I'm just gonna read another quote here. This is from an interview with Goodson in 2010. The Jews have been expelled from over 70 countries, some of them several times, but unfortunately they have such a tight control of the media. Well, there is a small window of hope in that the internet can provide alternative views, but even there, they are trying to exercise supervision. So, just I know I'm being... Yeah, Jenk would be like, you're being very selfish pointing out that Zoomer historian is a Nazi. But also, I haven't been subtle about it, and the Zoomer historian is certainly a Nazi.
Sub-Saharan Africa was one of the most prosperous parts of the world, a net exporter of food, with not one of its colonies burdened by international debt. This pleasant state of affairs would change dramatically over the ensuing years for the worse, end quote. To anyone with eyes, the African experiment had failed. Clearly, the Europeans had pulled out
To anyone with eyes, the African experiment had failed. The experiment of trying to turn entire countries into slave plantations? What the fuck are you talking about?
early. To the British, however, this meant nothing. The demands for southern Rhodesia to hand over control to her blacks only increased.
Her
Rhodesia,
blacks.
frankly.
Jesus Christ. Her indigenous people, like the black people who live there, like her blacks is such a grossly, like grotesquely racist way of putting it.
Was being asked to commit suicide. And this, obviously, they could not do. The Rhodesians were ready to concede almost everything, but suicide was beyond the pale. Ian Smith was not the racialist or the far-right winger, which Harold Wilson and the British in general made him out to be. A.K. Chesterton, perhaps rightly,
let's just real quick. That seemed utterly unrelated to anything. Ian Smith. Ian Douglas Smith, the farmer and former Prime Minister of Rhodesia. So interesting. Let's wonder what he was all about. Let's see. Let's find out, shall we?
The African experiment has failed, from a literal result of 300,000 years of the African experiment, which created man out of monk.
It's true. Like we literally all came from Africa. What? Oh man. Let's see. Here is a just a small paragraph from his Wikipedia here, okay? His determination to preserve the white minority's position in Rhodesia caused many black Africans and others to perceive him as a symbol of iniquitous white rule and racism. Smith always denied being driven by racial prejudice. In a 1987 interview, he asserted that he had been defending Western principles and that it was Marxism I fought, not blacks. Above all, he never expressed regret regarding his actions as prime minister. He insisted to his final days that the effects of Mugabe's presidency had borne out his predictions and proven him right. It's just like... Again, your entire existence as a politician was dedicated to upholding a white, literally the most white supremacist position one can have. You know? Like, it's literally the most white supremacist position you can have. God.
Wilson and the British in general made him out to be. A.K. Chesterton, perhaps rightly, labelled him as a man of the centre. The actual far-right Rhodesians were constantly in Smith's ear, telling him that he was giving too much ground. They were quite right, although whether he had a choice or not was another matter. Smith and most Rhodesians reluctantly conceded that majority rule would have to become a fact. The only point they were debating was when and how. Handing over control now would just result in another Congo. Only a lunatic would wish to put their people in such a situation. Give us time, Smith reasoned, and somehow we will make civilized Democrats out of our Africans. Slowly but surely, the blacks would have to be introduced to parliamentary democracy, and, as and when they were ready for it and met the qualifications, more and more Africans would be able to vote. Then, in Smith's mind, Rhodesia could be a functioning, multiracial democracy.
Can we, okay, just real quick. Apparently, an organization called Hope Not Hate has unmasked this guy. Apparently, Zoomer historian is known as Sam Wilkes. And I just need you guys to see a picture of him and understand that he's an example of what he thinks the master race of the planet is. Okay? I want you guys to keep in mind this guy thinks he is an exemplar of the master race that should, inherit the reins of the earth. You know? Yeah, he used to be a FIFA YouTuber of all things, and then pivoted into, Nazism. This guy thinks he's an example of like the pinnacle of human achievement. Dog, what are you doing, man? I don't know. Just kind of seems like, hey, maybe don't portray yourself. Well, let me put it this way. People who believe themselves to be the master race, they're deeply insecure and they need to find something that they feel redeems them in some way. And I guess for that guy, it was the color of his skin. Just an arbitrary, physical externality about himself. And it's just like, I don't know, find something better to like about yourself, man. It's weird. You took your skin color and made it your entire personality. Weird. And yeah, so he's that is Zoomer historian. And it's good to see that people are catching on to the insidious Nazis that are infesting YouTube these days. Just as an FYI, by the way, he has a tweet here about Patrick Bet-David from last year, where he tweeted out, "Rootless scum like Patrick Bet-David just use the United States like parasites purely for their own benefit. These people do not give the slightest fuck about America or Western civilization. Deport every single parasite back to the shithole countries they came from." And I just really want to emphasize here, that guy, that guy isn't American. Fuck you. You don't care about America. Fuck you. Patrick Bet-David cares more about America than you. And I fucking hate Patrick Bet-David and think he's a shit person, but he definitely cares more about America than you, and he fucking lives here. Keep my country's name out of your fucking mouth, you racist Nazi fuck. That guy's a historian? No, he's a dipshit YouTuber who's a Nazi and calls himself a historian. He's also a shill for the Homeland Party in the UK, which is a neo-Nazi party, by the way. Like, I'm not just calling him a neo-Nazi. He has an entire YouTube channel defending Nazis, and he supports a fucking Nazi party.
Rhodesia had always had multiracial voting, and, in fact, she had even conceded and created black-only seats. Blacks,
oh wow, what a kind thing for them to do.
Like whites, had always had to meet a certain income or property criteria in order to vote. The problem was, though, that most Africans simply didn't want to know.
Yeah, you know, that's a really convenient that's a really convenient expression of why it's actually fine to disenfranchise an entire group of people. Yeah. Look, sure, redlining existed, but you know, black people just didn't want to live in the white parts of town. Like, this is like so clearly bullshit as an explanation. Like, very clearly the like economic threshold was created specifically to maintain the white minority position and in leadership of like the Rhodesian political system. Like that's why they made it that way. God.
After independence, most Africans stood with Smith. The vast majority of them lived in the tribal trust lands, just as their ancestors had. They simply lived in their villages and let the chiefs take charge. The chiefs, again, were almost all pro-Smith and anti-terrorist. This was the kind of living which Rhodesia's Africans preferred. They didn't want democracy. They didn't even understand it. It was a foreign.
Yeah, but black people just couldn't understand democracy. It's just completely incapable of understanding it. You racist fuck.
Foreign concept. The white man offered him the world, but he simply didn't want to know. All kinds of excellent schooling and medical facilities were offered, but most Africans just wanted to live as they always had. This, of course, was their right.
They just wanted to be poor. They just wanted to be poor and they didn't want to be rich. You know, that's just how they do. Like, that's insane. That's insane. Because, like, there's a very insidious thing happening with the language here. You know, they had all the best facilities. They had all the best facilities made available to them. Available. They were made available. Yeah, if you had money. The entire understanding and political situation of Rhodesia was predicated on economic segregation, where if you had money, and by and large only white people had the money, you could do those things. And it was deliberately perpetuated to keep black people in the minority, that they didn't have the money to do these things.
The British settlers, as rulers, had allowed them to live their lives without being slaughtered by neighbouring tribes. They saw no reason to give up that peaceful life. Those calling for majority rule were a tiny minority of extremists. When British Prime Minister Harold Wilson came to Rhodesia to negotiate, he met with the nationalists and was in for a rude awakening. They had no interest in the white man's games or a negotiated settlement. They wanted majority rule with no strings attached, and they wanted it now.
Yeah, they wanted democratic rule? They wanted everyone in the country to be enfranchised? They wanted, like, you know, the country to be democratic for real? Instead of pricing everyone out who wasn't white? Yeah. You know, it seems to me, oddly enough here in this video, that the one who doesn't understand democratic rule here is Zoomer Historian, oddly enough. His brain seems to be incapable of understanding democratic rule, and incapable of wanting it, for some reason. So curious.
Most of all, they wanted blood, and they explicitly refused to go the legal route. It was not a matter of black versus white. At least, not yet.
Yeah. Uh-huh. They wanted blood. They just wanted blood. They were just bloodthirsty. For no reason, huh? No reason at all? You know, I keep, my brain keeps going back to some of the policies we discussed earlier. You know, like the ones about, say, being able to force black people into 3 months of indentured servitude every year. The idea that, actually you can just, you know, you can just prosecute them if they quit their job. I don't know. Seems maybe bad, actually. Seems like maybe not great. God.
The Rhodesian government was simply dealing with terrorists. The victims of this terrorism.
Again, this is when we get into, hey guys, what is the difference between a freedom fighter and a terrorist? What side you're on? It is a matter of perspective. And if you are approaching it with the perspective of a white supremacist neo-Nazi, then yeah, a bunch of people fighting to overthrow the Rhodesian government certainly would seem like terrorists, wouldn't they? The same way, King George viewed the pesky revolutionaries in America as terrorists. How dare they throw all of that valuable tea into Boston Harbor? How dare they fire upon British troops? Terrorism. It's a matter of perspective. And I, for one, have the perspective that fighting to overthrow a white supremacist, explicitly white supremacist regime that can enslave you on the basis of your race and will prosecute you and throw you in prison if you try to quit your job, I think that fighting that regime is probably good, actually. I did that. Okay, but they didn't really have to do that to all that tea. Could have just given it to me.
Them with their fellow Africans almost every single time. For 15 long years, the innocent Africans, just trying to go about their usual tribal lives, were harassed into supporting the terrorists. If they refused, their families, or even their entire village, could be killed like they were nothing. This was what African rule was all about.
Yeah, because white people never would have done that to any villages. White expeditionary forces never did that to any indigenous groups of people. The company states never would have done that in order to, increase their profit margins. Ha ha ha. Ha.
Smith had quite the task on his hands if he wanted to raise up his African population. He wrote of the small percentage which the government actually managed to get into education. Quote, "When one is confronted with accusations that large numbers of our indigenous people did not receive adequate education, the true reasons for this are never disclosed. The fact that when the pioneers arrived in the country, as recently as 100 years ago, there was no written language and no schools. The process of bringing our black people into the education system was long and tedious. For the first half-century, they were reluctant participants. As has already been mentioned, at the breakup of the Federation in 1963, our black people enjoyed the best educational facilities on the African continent. The tremendous impetus to education by the present government since 1980 was made possible.
Look at this white supremacist leader of the country with his dog. He has a dog. He couldn't be all bad. Look, he's dressed like Mr. fucking Rogers. He couldn't be bad. Fall for the propaganda. Fall for the propaganda. Like, it's so fucking transparent. Disgusting.
Because of the foundation and infrastructure they inherited. Moreover, let us not overlook the aggravating factor
that dog can be racist. That dog was racist.
But after the Pretoria Agreement of 1976, the terrorists initiated a new campaign of destroying schools in the tribal areas. Educational institutions, used exclusively for our indigenous tribespeople, books, desks, tables, chairs, and all equipment were piled in the center of the classroom and set alight.
We lifted them up, but they were just too savage to learn. It literally, every fucking KKK member thinks this about black people. This is just transparently racist. Because even in this context, like, very clearly, offering people like schooling doesn't offset the fucking colonial suffering, apartheid, like it forced enslavement, and like murders by government agents, like that, or just a rampant, you know, lack of voting power. It's just insane.
Right. Everything associated with the white man and his civilization had to be eliminated. Hundreds of schools were burned to the ground. I met the headmaster of one such school, who informed me that when he pleaded with the terrorists that they were destroying an asset which was being used for the welfare of their children, the reply was the butt of a rifle on the side of his head. He pointed to an ugly scar. Many thousands of our children were thus denied the opportunity of education they had previously enjoyed, hardly the fault of the previous white racists, end quote. There simply was not a sensible black movement ready to take the reins. Instead of waiting and, as Smith suggested, letting the process take place gradually, the British forced the Rhodesians to deal with communist terrorists who wanted them all dead. So much for the Cold War. Regardless, if one believed that African
Oh yeah, by the way, just a couple of things here. Two main groups of people went to go and fight, by the way, when war broke out in Rhodesia. Two main groups of people went to fight on behalf of Rhodesia. Does anyone want to take a wild guess at which groups those were? Anyone want to take a wild guess? Racists, yes, but I'm looking for nationalities. Americans, that's one. Americans is one. What's the other one, guys? Bring it home. Bring it home. I know you guys understand the dynamics here. Curly Dorothy, ding ding ding. And Israel. The US and Israel. Now, granted, the involvement of Americans with Rhodesia was entirely voluntary. About 400 Americans went to fight for the Rhodesian government on a volunteer basis. Israel was a supporter of Rhodesia in 1967. So that's cool. That's cool.
competence was due to education, and that they simply just needed to be helped up over time, and Smith's approach quite rightly sounded attractive. The current argument was simply an emotional one. Pure logic dictated that the whites must continue to run the government until such a time that the blacks were ready, no matter how long that was. Smith's ideas of eventual majority rule and pure meritocracy are of course nonsense, as non-Europeans, as shown in the West today, always vote along tribal lines, not merit lines. This is quite normal. We are the anomaly, not them. European liberalism is an exclusively European affair. The rest of the world, no matter what we do, will never be convinced to kneecap themselves in the name of fairness. Is it competence or fairness which matters at the end of the day? By liberal logic, the majority...
Yeah, Israel sold arms and ammunition to Rhodesia, and then granted them a license to produce said arms in Rhodesia, to fuel the Bush War.
should rule. This logic, however, leads to chaos. The Rhodesians chose logical competence over the emotional, moral approach of the rest of the world, which failed every single time. Trying to find a solution with the British to this conundrum was an impossible task. The British, or at least the Conservatives, were highly sympathetic. This was the post-1945 world.
Oh, by the way, this is why historically Zimbabwe has had support for the Palestinian people. Largely due to the fact that because Rhodesia was receiving official Israeli support to suppress liberation movements in Zimbabwe, because Rhodesia became Zimbabwe after the overthrow of the regime. But the president or leader, maybe prime minister, I forget if they have a prime minister or president, but Robert Mugabe wound up becoming a supporter of the PLO and Yasser Arafat, largely in response to the Israeli intervention in Rhodesia. So, yeah. And that has continued to this day. I believe Zimbabwe is a pretty vocal pretty vocal in favor of a two-state solution. So, yeah.
And they couldn't just come out and say that the white man should rule indefinitely. After all that black propaganda of World War II, that might sound just a bit too much like Hitler. The idea that blacks could be taught to partake in civilization properly, as Europeans had for centuries now, was far more acceptable. Every time this was packaged up, however, it just sounded like convoluted nonsense. Every plan involved a complicated procedure of blacks, slowly gaining more black-only seats over time. A sort of House of Lords type system in which blacks could veto white laws before majority rule, promises of funding to help civilize the Africans, and much more.
Yeah, except that the issue here is that, like, you shouldn't need a House of Lords setup. Just have a fucking democracy. Just enfranchise the population and let them vote.
The requirements for Africans to gain the vote were equally complex. As noted, Rhodesia was currently a meritocracy. The black.
No, it wasn't. That is just a lie. The meritocracy is just poor people can't vote, and overwhelmingly the poor people are black. That's it. When you say it was a meritocracy, you just mean poor people couldn't vote. Fuck you.
Blacks just simply weren't reaching up to the mark, despite having plenty of opportunities to do so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is just racist shit. This is the, by the way, whenever people to this day talk about, like, oh, society was merit-based, but then, you know, the civil rights movement happened or whatever. Like, it's just racist slop. It's slop for racists. It doesn't mean anything because meritocracy isn't a real thing. It's a nice idea that we should maybe strive to get, like, the most competent people in the jobs where they're able to do the best. That's a great idea. But overwhelmingly when it is invoked, these people are saying, well, black people are just not competent and therefore shouldn't succeed in, like, obviously wouldn't succeed in a meritocracy. Like, that's what these people do, right? They hide behind the idea of merit when what they're really talking about is racism. Gird yourself, folks. We have about 7 minutes left of going through this neo-Nazi historian's video, and I say historian with intended air quotes.
This, then, required a sort of affirmative action to make sure that unsuitable blacks could vote, but not their unsuitable
blacks, Jesus Christ.
White counterparts. Each and every time the British and Rhodesians came to an agreement, it fell through. More than anything, because even the harshest of British measures was shouted down by the horde of newly independent Afro-Asian Commonwealth nations, which threatened to walk out of the organization unless Rhodesia were mercilessly crushed. Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa of Nigeria was one of the loudest anti-Rhodesian voices, who was constantly crying out for British military intervention.
Yeah, kind of like, you know, Rhodesia had laws on the books that, you know, enslaved black people for 3 months out of every year, or made it illegal for them to quit their jobs. You know, just like, you know, kind of insane shit. You know, like, I don't know. Seems absolutely insane to me. Also, hey, fun fact. Did you know that in Rhodesia, if you were accused of a crime and you were black, you actually didn't have a right to a trial by jury? You just got heard by a judge. And you'll never guess what disposition the judges had in Rhodesia towards black people. The only white judges. So you didn't get a trial in front of a jury. Oddly enough, the sentences that were given to you by these white judges were harsher than crime committed by the same crimes committed by white people in Rhodesia, and you were also sent to your very own black prison. And, you know, I'm just gonna throw this out there. I don't think the black prisons, the black only prisons in Rhodesia were kind places. So yeah, I wonder why people were arguing for intervention to make it less racist.
After berating British PM Harold Wilson on one occasion, Balewa headed home, only to be brutally murdered alongside his family and allies merely days later. His nation then descended into anarchy. The Africans were all screeching about Rhodesia being a threat to world peace, despite their own countries.
Can we just like take a moment and like, this is what this guy fucking looks like. And I'm just throwing it up there because like he's the one talking about like world leaders screeching about like, you know, people like them being treated like they're subhuman on the basis of their race. And I just want to say, like, dog, you're a YouTuber. You're a YouTuber that puts out shitty, racist videos. Like, I don't really have an argument here. I guess it's an ad hominem, but like, fuck, man, you're like trying to portray like an entire like racial group as like subhuman, and you fucking look like this while making these videos. Like, I don't know, get the fuck out of here and work on yourself, man. Fix your goddamn heart. Yeah, how dare these people be upset at people like themselves being treated as subhuman because of the color of their skin and being disenfranchised and being called incompetent and lazy and selfish by people who looked like you, dog. You were a fucking FIFA YouTuber. Like you were a former FIFA YouTuber talking about, you know, a meritocracy society, a meritocratic society. Fuck you. If society was at all meritocratic, you would be like breaking rocks for the state. Jesus Christ.
Now being completely dysfunctional on their own watch. Even whilst being entirely dependent on British aid, the dictators continued to cry that the British weren't doing enough about Rhodesia. And
yeah, the dictators, the dictators of Africa. I wonder how they inherited the governmental frameworks that led to a consolidation of power around individuals. I wonder what kind of I don't know, continent-wide spanning incident may have occurred that led to that kind of governmental structure being relatively commonplace. Surely it had nothing to do with Europe and the scramble for Africa. It's just inherently how they are. This racist fuck.
Is there any shot a video this racist will get taken down?
No, of course not. All of his videos stay up. He has videos talking about how Lebensraum was a lie. Like he does Nazi apologia all the time. Lawrence, thank you very much for becoming a member. I appreciate it. And Vontux, thank you for the $5 super chat.
were threatening to sever ties with London. The Rhodesians, frankly, were living in a clown world in which there was simply no solution to their problems. The economy boomed after independence, despite almost the entire world placing sanctions on the Rhodesians' landlocked nation. With their minuscule security forces, they were able to protect their gigantic borders against a terrorist horde, which, by now, was proven beyond doubt to be
against the terrorist horde of people who wanted to be able to vote and to be able to have a real democracy and not be ruled by a racial elite. The terrorists who didn't want to be under the thumb of a dictatorial racial caste system. The evil terrorists who wanted to, you know, end the enforced enslavement of their people and, you know, the onerous double standards that, you know, would destroy their lives frequently and lead to their deaths. Kind of stop sounding like terrorists when you start listing some of their grievances.
funded by the British. Every engagement throughout the war resulted in Rhodesian victory. Nothing they could ever do was ever good enough. Concession after concession was made to their blacks. Almost every
Yeah, maybe because the what needed to happen was full enfranchisement. And again, they're blacks. Fuck you. Disgusting language.
everything had been given away, or offered away and rejected. Even the South African government began to join in, and they, eventually, were the ones who threw Rhodesia under the bus, in
Yep.
the naive hope they wouldn't be next on the chopping block.
One of the rare South African W's. Cutting off Rhodesia from support.
The emotional screeching from white liberals and the newly independent failed Afro-Asian states alike was simply too much to bear.
You know, real quick.
Wait till he finds out about the 25th dynasty of Egypt.
Oh God, what is? Yeah, he's never gonna talk about them. He's gonna say that never existed. Also, Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs. I very, very much appreciate it. And I'm just gonna throw this out there. Maybe if a state collapses because of a bunch of people screeching about the injustice in said state, maybe it's not a strong state. You know, maybe that's an indicator that it's not a very well-developed meritocracy if a bunch of people screeching brings it to its knees. Maybe that's actually a sign of how pathetically weak creating an ethno, state is. I'm just throwing that out there. Like, maybe if a bunch of people coming out and saying, "Hey, this is horseshit," destroys your country, maybe it actually was horseshit.
The entire world, to varying degrees, found themselves locked in an emotional struggle to crush the Rhodesians, simply for existing. Their only true friends, except for the South African people, not their government, had been Salazar's Portugal before the coup which saw the Portuguese pull out of Mozambique. The Rhodesians were not Nazis. In fact, they'd given the largest proportional contribution to—
Hey, just real quick, because I'm seeing something go down in YouTube chat. Mods are not under any obligation to debate you. They're here to clean up the chat. If you are giving sass to mods, you are going to get banned. And you're going to deserve it, because you're antagonizing someone with the ability to ban you. They don't have an obligation to, put up with your horse shit. They do it for free. They do this shit for free. Be kind to them, because they're taking on, a task that is, frankly, heroic in my eyes. And I would expect everyone to extend the same amount of respect that you would to me, to my mods. They are doing a relatively thankless task, day in and day out, dealing with people who come in and call me all manner of slurs, and people who want to get petty as fuck in the comments, and just don't. Just be kind. If you got a bug up your butt for some reason, take that out someplace else.
Britain's war effort against Hitler. They were not racialists, as Harold Wilson described them. Most of the army was black. The Rhodesians had offered the Africans the world, when, frankly, they did not deserve it.
Hey guys, did you know that the most racist country on earth to ever exist? They were actually offering the people they were
If there's meritocracy for screechers,
oppressing.
and I screech the longest and loudest, will I have billions of dollars? BWA, 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 BWA. Only
if you are screeching BWA. And thank you for the $5 super chat. Sorry, you're blue. I appreciate it. But I'm sorry, but if you're saying that, we are the most racist country in the world, offered the people they were oppressing everything, and they didn't deserve it. Dog, you're just fucking doing the racist apologia. You're just doing the propaganda of a state that has been dead and gone for 40 years. Man, stop. Stop that shit.
Even whilst the terrorists slaughtered white farmers or shot down civilian airliners, they were still being offered deal after deal, which was always entirely in their benefit. All the whites refused to do was commit suicide. All they wanted was a little time, a little prudence, some measures which would mean that their handover would not result in their genocide. This wasn't good enough for the world, and eventually it was too much to bear.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
All the whites refused to do was commit suicide. All they wanted was a little time, a little prudence, some measures which would mean that their handover would not result in their genocide.
Yeah, maybe a good way of doing that would be to, like, stop enslaving African people. Maybe a good way of doing that would be to, like, not make it illegal to quit your job. Maybe a good way to do that would be to, like, I don't know, like, become an actual democracy instead of, redlining people out of their voting rights. I don't know. Like, I can think of a number of really good ideas right off the bat. Like, hey, oh, you know what? Maybe black people deserve trials in front of juries. Maybe that would be good. I'm just throwing that out there. Like, maybe that would be a good thing. I don't know. Because honestly, I don't think that's what the white ruling class in Rhodesia was trying to do. I don't think they were trying to figure out a way for a handover to take place. They were trying to do everything in their power to prevent the handover from taking place. They were doing everything in their power to keep their power, to keep their wealth, to keep their power.
This wasn't good enough for the world, and eventually it was too much to bear.
Yeah, because discriminating along racial lines as a matter of state policy is generally not super popular with other countries.
The Rhodesians had easily won every single battle, but they had lost the war. The world, not the terrorists, had crushed them. In 1980, an entirely unsatisfactory deal was signed, in which the British once again betrayed the Rhodesians. Over and over again, they insisted that Robert Mugabe would not come to power. They promised the Rhodesians they would ensure the election that they would preside over was free and fair. As it turned out, it was not. British bobbies stood by all over Rhodesia as Mugabe terrorized his own people into voting for him.
So by saying that it wasn't a fair election, you mean that just, like, the majority of people in the country turned out to vote and they voted for Robert Mugabe? Oh, weird. That you say that doesn't sound fair. That, to me, that sounds extremely fair, actually.
Rhodesians were left to deal with it. By the year 2000, the white population had gone from nearly 300,000 to merely 50,000. Most had emigrated to escape the grisly fate that was meted out to those who remained. The Africans, as they had in every other independent African nation, began to engage in genocide between the tribes as well. Majority rule had benefited no one. Unemployment under white rule was under 10%. By the 2000s, it was at 95%. Inflation reached 231 million%. People were literally starving to death in the streets. White farms were stolen by the state and given to blacks, who, in almost every case, had no idea what they were doing. The soil was destroyed and rendered useless by the Africans' incompetence in the farming department.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw this out there that, generally speaking, a lot of these policies related to soil were pushed for by Western white corporate individuals, people who are pushing different corporate ideas into these countries as, like, testing grounds, effectively treating them as laboratories.
The breadbasket of Africa was now undergoing a famine. Today, one can find Zimbabwe's blacks complaining on social media that life was better for their fathers under Smith's regime. Anyone with eyes, however, could have seen this coming a mile away. The emotional mass of people, white and black alike the world over, needed to stop and think. Perhaps their high and mighty ideas weren't so high and mighty after all.
Their ideas were just white supremacy, man. Like, that's it. That was fucking it.
The situation is much the same today. The media, and, indeed, most people until recently, insisted that immigration was a good thing. It was our duty to open up our borders to millions of third worlders.
I know he's going into a racist diatribe, but, like, just as a quick thing, it's interesting that he continues to talk about, like, Rhodesia as if it lasted into the year 2000. Like, Rhodesia ceased to be in 1980 during that agreement with Britain. Like, Britain formally granted independence to a new nation called Zimbabwe. Oh, also look, it's him pushing the neo-Nazi party in the UK. That's crazy.
Terrorist attacks, mass rape, skyrocketing crime, and the economy being in the gutter did not change government minds.
You know, like, I'm sorry, the mass rape going on in the UK from insane stuff. Yeah, it turns out when you are a globe-spanning imperial empire, eventually, like, people return to the imperial core. It's weird how that works.
The Great Replacement simply had to keep going on.
Ah, yes. There's the anti-Semitic fucking conspiracy theory.
Once more, however, anyone with eyes can tell that such an experiment is going to end in tears. There will be many who, like Smith, are able to write in their memoirs and proudly proclaim, "I told you so." The story of Rhodesia is so
Yeah, you know, all of those Nazis who live long enough to say "I told you so." Kind of a flaw with that plan, though. Y'all, you Nazis tend to try this shit periodically. It turns out to be not great for your health when you try and seize the power in this way. But, you know, this guy's insufferable. Well, he is basically a child Nazi, so, you know.
important to us today because it shows so clearly how corrupted our politics are by emotional nonsense. The Rhodesians alone had built Rhodesia. They were the ones who...
No, they used slave labor and had other people build it for them. They used slave labor and colonialism to do that. Fuck you.
forevermore should have ruled it. The overwhelming majority of Africans didn't even want to rule it anyway. Life was better under the British settlers. This was...
It was not. Like, objectively, by every conceivable metric, it was not. Wait, how old is he? I don't know. He calls himself a Zoomer. Probably like 20-something.
was the simple, harsh reality. Such an opinion then would have been completely unpalatable though. Rhodesia is now dead and buried. The Rhodesians, although few in number in Zimbabwe itself, still live.
Why do people think the Great Replacement is happening? Because they look around and they see slightly more like non-white people in places that used to be predominantly white. That's it. That's it. They take that one observation and they say, ah, yes, every single, person who's not white here is taking up the place of a white person. Therefore, there is a great replacement underway, and the Jews are doing it. The Jews are stealing away white people and replacing them with black and brown folks. It really is that is the crux of it. And the idea is that it's to weaken the nation and make it easier for it to fall. To complete their evil Jewish plans. That's how the conspiracy goes. I, of course, find that all to be complete and utter nonsense and horseshit. But that is the conspiracy theory, and it's relatively simple and accessible, which is why a lot of conservatives fall into believing it.
On, but the majority of them are scattered around the world. What they had can never be brought back except by extremely
what they have can never be brought back. Good.
drastic action, which is not happening anytime soon. It is not, however, too late for ourselves. We still have the chance to break our chains, stop the madness, and
we have the chance to break our chains and establish a white supremacist state here. What? Wait. break the chains of not in. Break the chains of what? Break the chains and establish a white supremacist neo-Nazi state. I guess we're being chained back from being racist.
in the tide. We are the last frontier of civilization.
Oh my
Rhodesia
God.
fell.
We're the last frontier of civilization. Blah.
Africa fell, but Europe and the Anglosphere does not have to. We can say no. The relevance of the Rhodesian story.
Can we, just out of curiosity, understand, by the way, that for these folks, they're very special kinds of racists, even if they got the kind of ethno-state they desire, they would just start fear-mongering against the impure whites, you know? To otherize, you know, the any dissident groups who are of non-Aryan stock. Love starting my Saturday with your stream. Glad you're enjoying it, Lawrence. Thank you for the $2 super chat.
And the Anglosphere does not have to. We can say no. The relevance of the Rhodesian story is why I've spent the past 9 months.
The last bastion of human civilization. You know, the country that went around the world and turned everything into colonies to steal their spices and then didn't use any of them. The last bastion.
Months working on a complete history of Rhodesia. I'm not finished yet, and as I type this, I'm currently sat on like almost page 200 of the Word document. Perhaps a 12-hour video. But I feel it is a top.
God. 12 hours of this twerp's insane Nazi ramblings. Again, this is why I say, like, this guy and What If Alt Hist are basically the same person.
Topic that deserves it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this very short video.
Oh man, he's using the same, like, homoerotic image again from the beginning of the video. Just, you know, just dudes being dudes, you know? Back in the good old days when you could be just like a racist in short shorts with a gun. We need to go back. That's when things were great. You know, no women around either. You just hung out with your bros. You know, talking about the things you all have in common, like how white you are, and, you know, how much you love smoking cigarettes, and, you know, not having sex with ladies. You know, back in the good old days. When men could be men, unfettered by the feminine. You know what I mean? No women anywhere whatsoever. It was the best of times. And then the women came and it was the worst of times.
Video. To most, this will be their first introduction to Rhodesia, and they'll probably have no clue, in detail at least, of what I've just been saying.
You know, that's kind of the crux of it, I think, for a lot of people who wind up watching this guy's videos, right? For a lot of people, they just won't have any idea what I'm talking about. Yeah, that kind of helps you, doesn't it? Like, the fact that people have no idea, that they have no idea about this particular part of history and this particular part of the world allows you to just kind of say anything. Like that time when you made a reference to a historian who was a South African banker with no academic credentials of writing history.
It's wild living in Europe and seeing lots of the same racism as back home. It was nice Germany gave the IF the label it deserved.
Right? This guy is the guy making this video is British and supports the British Nazi Party. It's crazy.
As noted though, I'll be covering everything in greater detail.
No, Ophelia, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Nomi Sunrider, thank you for the $2 super chat. Yeah, people watch his video and they just don't, like, if they just don't know anything about this, they don't know he's full of shit. And so you can have a bunch of young people who have no idea about this particular part of history watch this video, and then they're like, yeah, that all sounds right. Because they didn't bother to look up, you know, who, you know, this guy was. And it turns out he's not a historian. He's a guy who's most famous for writing a book about fucking anti-Semitic pro-Nazi theories. You know, like, and so he's free to portray Rhodesia here in this video as like as Ophelia says in chat, like white Wakanda or white Kanda, if you will. That's essentially what he does here. Right? It's just rewriting history, and instead of like really grappling with like the explicitly anti-black laws of the Rhodesian government, he instead is just like, no, is like the best possible world for both the white people and the black people. It's cowardly, exactly. It's cowardly and also, like, you know, manipulative. You know, like Nazis do.
And in an understandable way, in a few months' time, when I'm finished with the main video. An extra special thank you to those of you who support me on Subscribestar or as YouTube members. Ever since my Patreon was randomly banned, you guys have...
Yeah. Just randomly banned. Yeah, for no particular reason, just a random banning. You know how it do.
Been a lifesaver, and it really dug me out of that hole and allowed me to keep producing these videos for a living. I cannot thank you enough. For those of you who are not already signed up, please do.
All right, we're done. Yeah, definitely not banned for being a Nazi, just randomly banned. God. Canceled by the woke mob. What, can't a Nazi even get a Patreon anymore? Ugh, the woke mob came for me. Can he get banned on YouTube? Man, I hope so someday. Oh, Nomi Sunrider, I'm aware of Day of the Rope. I'm not gonna look that up right now. Oh yeah, no, this guy's channel has 170,000 subscribers, and this particular video had like 165,000 views. So like, yeah, again, I don't cover no-name people that nobody watches. Generally speaking, this is unfortunately a problem that we should engage with in order to debunk the worst of these just absolute lies. So with that being said, I think we did a good job addressing a lot of his major claims here. I probably missed a couple just because like I'm not an expert on this subject matter. I do know enough about like African history to be able to like talk about some of this in broad strokes, but I guarantee you there are better books on this particular period of history. And you should maybe seek them out if you're interested in this at all, because I guarantee you doing further reading on this is going to be very revelatory about how full of shit this guy is. So I'm disturbed by how mask off he was. Well, you know, he's been doing it for like 2 years now, and no one seems to care. So he's just getting more and more mask off. But hopefully me doing content, you know, shitting on his, you know, bullshit helps a little bit, and for whatever it's worth.
Riverboat Jack is coming to town. All the viewers gather around. Twitch and YouTube and switching streams. All that content is bursting the scenes. Politics, daily, plenty more. Your sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord.